Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Development Management Committee of the 15th of November. Welcome to council members present, officers and members of the public. Just some housekeeping first. In the case of a fire alarm, and we're not expecting a drill today, exit the doors and the building through those doors and make your way to the far end of the car park. Public toilets are outside the door on the left. Water is available on the outside on the door on the right. Reminder, this is a public meeting and members of the public are welcome to listen to the debate today, but unless registered as a speaker, you're not able to take part and speak. Can I also ask councillors and members of the public to please switch off mobile phones and not use them? That was a good prompt. We are live webcasting today, so can I please remind members to use their microphones and remember to turn them off when not speaking. In terms of how items are to be presented today, the order for each application is as follows. The case officer will present their report, the objector will speak, the supporter will speak, parish council representative will speak, and then ward member or members will speak. Members will be able to question each speaker on points of clarity. At the conclusion of the debate on each application, the members will vote and come to a decision. I will ask the officers at the top table to introduce themselves, but firstly myself. I'm Councillor Mark Long and Chairman of the DM Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And my name is Amelia Bolter. I'm Senior Democratic Services Officer and Clerk to this committee.
Good morning. My name is Bernard Taylor. I am Vice Chairman of the committee and look after Mark.
Good morning, everyone. I'm David Fairbairn. I'm Head of Legal Services and Monitoring Officer and the legal advice of the committee this morning.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lucy Hall. I'm one of the planning officers here and the lead planning officer today.
Hello, my name's David Stewart. I'm one of the planning officers dealing with an application that's going to be discussed this morning.
Thank you, everybody. Can I ask for apologies today?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, apologies have been received from Councillors Mackay and O'Callaghan, and Councillor Dommett is substituting today. Thank you.
And we also have, although he's not a member of this committee, from Councillor Thomas, Lead Executive Member on Planning, who would have liked to have been here today, but he has a county council clash with meetings. Can we move on to agenda item 1, the minutes of the last meeting for the 18th of October? Is everybody in agreement with those minutes? If so, could I please have a proposer and seconder? Thank you. Thank you. Agenda item 2, urgent business. There are no items of chair's business. Division of the agenda. I'm not aware of any reason to divide the agenda. And item 4, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest that members wish to make for the 2 items that we're hearing today? No, thank you. The list of speakers has been circulated to members. I will now move on to item 6, the planning applications, and move on to the first application, which is 274823 FUL. The case officer is Graham Smith. The recommendation is conditional approval. Mr. Smith, over to you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Apologies I can't be there today. This is a planning application at Ford Road in Wembury, and it's for a domestic garage with storage. So this is just a location plan of the site. The site is rectangular. It's nestled amongst other houses and gardens. It's important to note that the applicant doesn't live immediately adjacent. They live in Wembury, but just a little bit further away. So it's not a householder application, it's a full application. The site is, as I say, rectangular. Things to note about it is it's within the AONB. The road at this part where Highfield Drive meets Ford Road is raised above the housing to the north. Levels fall away quite sharply generally. This site has been built up over the years and is more in line with the road, albeit, as some of the neighbours have noted, there is a bit of a gentle slope downwards from the front of the site at the roadside to the back. A little bit of historical context: there was a hall on this site many years ago that has since been demolished, and more recently the site has been fairly vacant. It's been subject to some dumping of debris and things like that. Just some images of the site just to show you the context on the street. You'll see that the houses to the rear are quite considerably lower than the road level. Beyond that, you've got the AONB landscape. This is just a photo from your site visit recently. Just shows you the current status of the site. This is one of the two of the dwellings to the rear, which are probably the most affected by any development. Number 6 there, notably, it has some parking to its frontage. It's set a little bit further down from that still, so it just shows you a bit more of the context. Looking from number 6, the parking area, up towards the site. This is a photo taken at summertime in the middle of the day, just again looking up towards the site there. Another thing to note about the history of this site is that there was a refusal of a garage under delegated powers earlier this year. We had concerns about this proposal and subsequently refused it due to 4 reasons. We were concerned about the visual impact of it, of the materials, of the design. We felt it was over dominant in terms of the nearest dwellings to the north. We felt that it didn't provide any biodiversity enhancement, and we were concerned about the carbon footprint of it. So it was refused. The applicant decided not to appeal that decision. Instead, they have resubmitted this application, which is this one here. So a number of small changes have been made to the design. A hipped roof's been added. It's a little bit lower down. It now incorporates render and roof tile. There are less Velux windows proposed. So I think this application looks to try and address those concerns that we had previously, and our conclusion is, on balance, that we think that it is now compliant with the local plan policies of most relevance. These are just some more zoomed in views of the site plan, just in case that previous one wasn't that clear. We've got a floor plan just with a simple layout with the garage and the ground floor, storage above, and an internal staircase. As you can see, we've got some measurements of head heights there. It's coming out just above 2 meters on the ground floor, and at the highest point, 1.9 meters upstairs, tapering down to about 1 meter or so. This is one of the plans most recently received, and it, as what the neighbour had pointed out, previous plans had shown a flat site, whereas there is a gradient downwards. I think when you were on your site visit, it was asked to us the extent of the level change, and we've since had the agent confirm that that is 500 from the front of the roadside to the back of the site. He's used a kind of laser measurement, the type that surveyors usually would, in order to make that measurement. That is not really accordance with what some of the neighbours have told us. They're saying that the levels changes as much as a metre. So that there's a bit of disagreement there. But I think using the most accurate measurement, the agent has concluded that at the most it's 500, which would accord with this plan. You can see the site sloping down gently. They've given a measurement of 4.9 from the ground level to the apex of the hipped roof on that plan there. just a side elevation, a rear elevation. So the key issues in this application, we think, is that the design amendments, when viewed as a whole, we do consider them to have addressed previous concerns. We are now content that this development accords with policies, the design policies DEV 20, DEV 23 and DEV 25 of the Joint Local Plan. We do no longer feel that there's an unacceptable loss of amenity for the nearest residents in terms of policy DEV 1. And we also feel that it now achieves biodiversity enhancement and is of a sufficiently low carbon design in compliance with the other two policies. So that is our position on it. There was a number of questions with regards to the site visit that we weren't able to answer. The first one I think I've already covered with regards to the levels change. The second, it was asked where the datum point was. That was from the road, is where the agent has measured that. It was asked if there's any reference point on the street scene by one of the councillors. Quite difficult to provide any kind of reference point, given there's the levels differences. I would suggest that the average two-storey house is round about 7 metres high. What we have from the roadside upwards is 4.7 metres high. In terms of the garage door, it's been queried whether that is up and over or folding out design. The agents clarified that it would be the up and over style for practicality reasons. It could be treated as a minor change. I think it's referred to somewhere in supporting documentation as being opening out the way, but the plan, that's an up and over door. In terms of roof lights, a couple of the members made a condition on requiring them to be fixed. The agent is agreeable to adding a condition requiring those roof lights to be not only obscure glazed, but to be fixed. So they would be happy for that to be amended. Finally, it was asked what the distance was between the wall of the garage and the boundaries. So the agents confirmed that would be 1 metre between the wall and the side boundaries approximately. And the distance between the back wall of the garage and the front elevation of number 6 Ford Road, they're saying is 8 metres, which kind of both of these measurements going to work out on in terms of our scale drawings we have here. So I think that was all the outstanding questions for the site visit. I don't think I have anything else to add. I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. First one, Councillor Hodgson.
Yeah, I'm very sorry I was unable to attend the site meeting on Monday. It was very unfortunate that, because I think it's really, in something like this, it's really important to understand the site. So I've got two questions. One is, and it might be a bit of a random question in a way, but I'm thinking about we normally look at things in terms of need. And I'm just wondering, you know, what's the purpose of this garage? Because I can't see that written out anywhere. I mean, presumably it's to put vehicles in, cars in, or is it tractors or whatever? And it's because it's huge. So it's going to be 2 vehicles, presumably one after the other, in there to get that, to justify the length. Or is it potentially going to be a commercial operation, which could end up with a lot of vehicles in the street queuing up to have things done? So would it be classed as commercial or would it be classed as residential? And my second question is, in terms of, if I saw from one of the photos, the proximity of number 6, which is, I understand they're really close. Is number 6, that's the one at the back? But what about those 2 at the side? Am I right in understanding that where the garage is, looking at that plan at the moment, it's going to be elevated in relevance to those properties? Are they, what are those 2 square properties? Are they garages or sheds or something, or are they residential occupation there?
Those are outbuildings.
Okay.
So as you can see on the left there, that's one of the garages from one of the neighbouring properties. That is sunk a little bit further down into the land.
Okay.
As you can see.
Thank you. Can you go back to that previous photo that you just showed then? So that one.
This one?
Yeah. So I'm thinking, if that's parking, and if you've got people parking and you've got a window, looks very, very close. I mean, exhaust fumes are a pretty unpleasant thing. That's that's the owner's. That's the person who's building the garage.
Okay, in
That's number
terms of
6. So they could end up. What I'm trying to say is they could potentially end up with exhaust fumes straight in their window, looking at that.
No, that's their own parking area, number 6.
Okay, thank you. So right.
yeah, in terms of the first point, yeah, I think a number of the neighbours have raised concerns about the intentions of what would be proposed here. We've had it clarified from the applicant this is a domestic garage for parking cars and storing domestic stuff. There's no commercial proposed here. We would also supplant that with a condition defining the permission that's just for domestic use only for parking of cars and storage, domestic storage. So if they wanted to use it for any other use, they would need an application to assess the impact of that at a later date.
Okay, thank you.
In terms of the fumes of exhausts, that's not really something that I would think would be sufficient enough to make it contrary to policy Dev 1, given the scale of the development and the proximity. And I think the garage would be enclosed as such, so there would be the car coming and going from there.
Am I understanding that correctly, though, that going back to that photograph, I understood when you covered that in your report, that one, that cars would be parked there. That's why I'm raising the question of.
Yeah.
Or is that where the actual building's going to go right there?
No, that is the parking area of number 6.
Right. Okay.
That's
okay.
the drive, the
Thank you.
private driveway of number 6.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Panel.
Thank you, Chair. At our site meeting, we were given various plans, including elevations of the church room that used to be there, presumably in the lifetime of the neighbouring buildings. Are you able to tell us how the application compares with the height and massing of the old building that was on the site? And does the fact that there was a building there previously confer any development rights to allow a similar building or not?
I don't have details of the height of the previous building that was demolished quite some time ago. I would suggest that this development is going to be marginally higher than that. A matter of centimetres, I would have thought. The main difference would be the eaves. There's a shallower pitch on what's being proposed here, so the eaves would be higher than, that's quite a kind of narrow pitch, in my opinion, whereas the eaves of what's proposed here would be higher up. You see there's 3 windows in the side elevation there, and generally the materials I would say are not of a very high quality. The application we refused was kind of proposing similar materials, which I don't think are of a very high standard. So I think it would be more or less the same. The neighbours may disagree with me there. It's going to be a little bit higher, with higher eaves, certainly.
Can I have Ms Hall come in, please? Thank you.
Yeah, so I attended the site visit on Monday, and I printed out a copy of what the elevations, which is from a 2012 application. There was an application for a replacement church hall, and rather helpfully, the elevations online of what was there have got some dimensions. So in terms of the height, it was 5.3 metres approximately to the ridge, and about 3 metres to the eaves. Obviously, what has been proposed in front of you today is effectively a 2-storey structure, and this was just a single-storey structure.
Thank you. Councillor Nix. Oh, sorry, Councillor Panel.
There was a second part to the question, which was, does the fact that there's been a building of this scale on the site already confer any planning rights?
I would just say I would treat it as being a brownfield site rather than greenfield. Not necessarily any permitted development rights. It's not a part of a residential dwelling. It kind of sits on its own.
Thank you. And you've mentioned the height there of 5.3 to the ridge. Can you remind me what the height of the proposed building is, please, to the ridge?
It would be, well, from the road level, it would be about roughly, I'd say 4.7 metres in height. From the road level to the tip of the apex of the roof. That's been reduced down from 5.1, which is the height that was of the one that was previously refused.
And at the far end, it adds an extra 500 mil to the ground level. Sorry, 500 centimetres to the ground level. 50 centimetres. Yeah, 50 centimetres.
Thank you. Councillor Nix.
Yes, you were saying 1 metre from the boundaries on the side. Is that the boundary to the land, or is that boundary the neighbour's boundary?
It would be the neighbour's boundary. So on either side into the rear, the neighbour's boundary, they're saying it's set back 1.5 metres from the roadside where the site meets the road.
Okay, and the fencing that's already there, is that the neighbours, or is that on the site where the proposal is?
The fencing, I think the neighbours might be better placed to answer. I don't know who put that up there. I don't know who in whose land that is. You know, is ownership. I'd imagine that demarcates the boundary. It would look to me that potentially it's a neighbour has put that fence up with the slats facing into the site.
Thank you.
Councillor Bonham.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I guess just to try and clarify, because I've got some confusion in my mind here, the application that was refused, which is, I believe, 1454, it was refused partly because of the virtue of the size, scale, position, etc. Yeah. And point number 2 talks about elevated position close to the nearest neighbours. This new application is not very different, really, in terms of its size. I think it's less than 10% lower, just based on my calculation of the numbers. So I think one thing in my mind is, don't we need to be consistent? And do you feel that the change in size is sufficient to allow this new application? And perhaps you could just elaborate your answer on that. And secondly, to follow up on Councillor Pannell's question with regard to the previous building that was there, are we in this committee, do we normally take into account the fact that there was a building previously on the site of very similar size and in fact slightly higher than the new proposal? Is that something we take into account or not in considering the question of size, scale, position and impact on neighbours and so on, or not?
I think the site history is a material consideration. We would take into account what's been there just in terms of the context. I think what the neighbours would probably be quite keen to say is that building was demolished quite a number of years ago, and in the intervening period they've enjoyed a relatively open outlook. So we feel that it's important to highlight the site history. With regards to the first point, I think if you looked at any of the alterations in isolation, you know, I would probably agree that they look on the face of it quite minor. The decision that we've made is a balanced one, weighing up all of the changes, you know, in combination. So things like little tweaks to design, like the introduction of a hipped roof, along with the combination of a slightly lower design, we think has you know, makes it a more acceptable proposal in terms of the amenity of the adjoining neighbours. The change of material, going away from a kind of metal sheeting towards something that's a little bit more local vernacular in terms of render and roof tiles, the reduction in Velux windows. When you take account of all these things in combination, we think that it's unacceptable and in accordance with the relevant policy that we assess them against.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Graham.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Councillor Rake.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little concerned about this stairway inside, in that it comes up into the hip, at the bottom of the hip there. I mean, so you won't have any headroom above. I mean, is that a matter for us, or once if we were to approve this, would the applicant be able to jiggle around the layout of their stairs as they wished?
I think for practical reasons, you couldn't put a staircase in the front and side. If you're parking a car there, you know, neighbours have noted this. It's going to be incredibly tight trying to get up those stairs. In a way, that aspect of the development makes it even less habitable, which is, I suppose, one of the concerns that neighbours have, is that this becomes a kind of habitable room. The applicant has been quite clear that that's not the case. It's going to be used to put boxes and domestic storage up there. So I don't think we would normally get into the details of the ergonomics of whether that staircase is usable or not. In the circumstances, we obviously would, if it was going to become a kind of habitable arrangement, certainly would, in terms of building regulations. But I think from a planning point of view, for a domestic store, it's not necessarily something that I would probably look into.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Thank you. You mentioned that one of the reasons for turning down the last application was because they weren't contributing to biodiversity improvement. Could you explain how the new development does? Thank you.
Yes, the new development has proposed a couple of bird bricks on one of the side elevations. So that's the small biodiversity enhancement that they're proposing. I think I've looked at the context. The existing site clearly isn't contributing to biodiversity in any way, really. What's proposed will provide some nesting opportunities, and I think the relevant policy requires us to consider proportionate biodiversity enhancements, which I feel has been carried out in this instance, probably more so than your average domestic garage would achieve.
Any further questions from members to Mr. Smith? If not, thank you. We'll now move on to the objector, Mr. Spencer. So if you'd like to settle in, you have 3 minutes, and remember to switch on your microphone. Thank you.
Very much. We've been pointing out inaccuracies in the plans for the last 4 months. Elevations didn't tally, ground levels were wrong, and a section should have been included. Revised plans have arrived at the 11th hour, giving us no time for consultation. The first previous refusal reason relates to size, scale, position, design, and choice of materials being unsympathetic to the existing street scene and failing to conserve and enhance an area of outstanding beauty. The garage may have been reduced by height, but only by 400 millimetres. The roof has been hip, but this doesn't add to the physical appearance or reduce the critical impact at the front. The walls have now been rendered, but with no control over the colour. The tiles are the same as the original application form. The siding is identical, a component of the refusal. Planning officer states that it sits more comfortably in the street scene, but the criteria according to the refusal reason is that it should enhance and preserve an area of outstanding beauty. There's no mention of how it does this, and now it's suddenly acceptable. I would ask members to consider whether or not you feel that this is the case, as it is still in our view that the building would be extremely prominent still, and would have the appearance of a commercial building and would be seriously detrimental to the visual amenities of the area. The building, even with a rear hip roof, will have a marked adverse impact on the amenities of the adjoining properties. My bungalow is only 7.5 metres away from the application site. The proposed building now has high walls, 3.54 metres to the eaves and 4.99 to the ridge, now more than the officer's report. But with accurate plans, these measurements could be even greater when viewed from the rear, maybe 500 millimetres higher. because the planning department did acknowledge that the site fell by 1,000 millimetres, see previous report, and not 300 millimetres as per the plans. Plans are only approximate in the applicant's own words, so you can see that the reduction in height offered by the applicant and this revised application isn't as much benefit as first appears. The eaves of our bungalow at number 6 are approximately the same height as the ground level of the rear of the application site, and consequently the proposed 1.5-storey building will have the appearance of a 2.5-storey building when viewed from the rear of our bungalow. The overall effect of this will be a building that will completely dominate the rears of number 6 and number 8 Ford Road, with 5 windows which face towards the development. The revised skylights are now to be obscure glazed, but when open will look directly into number 6 and 8 windows, and therefore, as I heard earlier, will be fixed. Had the wall height been lower and the footprint been that of a conventional garage building, with lower ground levels together with accurate plans, this would be a more acceptable situation for all of us. We believe the application should be refused again. Incidentally, the site area is not 60 square metres as stated. The applicant lives about a quarter of a mile away, and I see that the roller shutter blinds have been accepted by them, but that was a highways officer's recommendation last time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spencer. Any questions for Mr. Spencer? Councillor Bonham. Mr. Spencer, if you could just switch off your microphone. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for your statement and helpful to see the site a couple of days ago. My question is regarding the previous building. I wonder if you know the chapel. I wonder if you know when that was first built or when it was demolished. Thank you.
The chapel was went up for sale and managed to be sold after it had been there for about 100 and something years, I believe. It was demolished over 10 years ago, so therefore it shouldn't be part of this application. This is a brand new site that we're starting with. I think it was demolished 10 years ago, the church building.
Thank you, Mr. Spencer. Any other questions? Sorry. Oh, Councillor Rake.
Just quickly, thank you, Mr. Spencer. And just on the same point, were you already in residence? Were you in residence before the chapel was demolished?
Yes, I've been living in that house since 1997. So I was there. The chapel was used for. Well, it wasn't a chapel. It was a church room that was used for odd occasions of parties or women's institute or dancing, but it wasn't used on a regular occurrence at all. And you did ask a question about the fence. Can I answer that one? You asked about the fence that was around the wooden fence. The wooden fence was put up by the neighbours in number 6, number 8, and myself. And the wooden fence is owned by us and was put up because the site was such a mess, and we decided we wanted to, block it off from our land.
Thank you, Mr. Spencer, for that clarification. Any further questions? Yes, there are. Thank you very much, Mr. Spencer. Thank you. We have no supporter today, but we do have a statement to be read out by the clerk from Wembury Parish Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The response from Wembury Parish Council is objection due to the amount of concern from residents, inconsistencies in planning application, scale of development, rear staircase, access to highway, lack of main lights, no EV charging point as expected for a garage, and overlooking neighbours. Also, the council recommended solar powers be a condition of any permission. Thank you.
Thank you. Obviously not an opportunity to question the parish council on that. We'll move on now to the ward members for Wembury and Brixton. Who's going first? Councillor Nix.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this has been ongoing for a number of applications, as you're aware. I've been contacted by quite a number of residents in that area, and obviously the parish council have made an objection to this particular planning application. It's going to be very visible from the area of outstanding natural beauty because it's going to be up high. I believe that the previous Sunday school building, as it's known locally, was demolished approximately 2010, 2011 time, so over 10 years ago. So that view has been very open for the last 10 years. I think it was mentioned before that we're looking to enhance and improve the area. Does a building built in that way, so close to the road, enhance and improve that area? And we're looking at the scale on that site. Going over to neighbour amenities, obviously that will be a very high brick or rendered wall from the back of number 6 and to the side from number 8 and the other side as well. And obviously the houses across the road, because as you would have seen from your site visit, you know, there's houses across the road and it's right opposite the junction as well. So if there's cars going in and out, I noticed we haven't, the highways have said that there are no implications, but that's a very narrow area. I think it is going to have a dominant and visual impact, although I can see that they have gone some way to putting in some biodiversity, although still not enough. I know there's no precedent, but on previous applications we've asked for garages with EV chargers, etc. Obviously there's no power to this site, so that's not a possibility here. So we're not looking at the going forwards at how this is going to improve and be environmentally what we're looking at as a council. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nix. Councillor Carson, thank you.
Yeah, I think the changes made are not enough from the previous application. There's only minor tweaks. A couple of bird boxes are not enough really to add biodiversity to this area of outstanding natural beauty. The actual garage itself is quite grand for a garage. Why do we need 2 stories? As the resident said, you know, if it was just a normal sized garage, that would be acceptable. But this is 2 stories, and also it's going to be storing allegedly commercial product rather than just home bits and bobs. The actual person who wants to build this has said that's not the case, but we have no way to stop that really. I think the minor tweaks and the size and scale of this should be turned down as previously.
Thank you, Councillor Carson. Mr. Fairbairn would like to ask a question.
Councillor Carson, I think you've said a couple of things there which ring alarm bells with me. You said you think the changes are not enough, and you said this should be turned down. You sound as though you're fairly firm in your view. Are you saying that you have not got a closed mind in terms of determining this planning application?
Apologies. It should be the minor tweaks are not enough to grant this, and it should be as previously.
So you're saying that you still have an open mind and are prepared to consider everything you hear?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any questions of Councillor Nix or Carson? If not, thank you. And we'll now move into debate the application. Who wishes to start? Councillor Abbott.
So it would seem from the conversations that we've listened to, the points that are being made, that at some point a garage would be acceptable at this location, and I can see that compared to the present view, it would look, whatever building was there would look as though it was sticking out, unconnected to other development. And I'm not sure then if you could eventually get to a small enough garage which you can get a Quinquecento into, that the view would change. It would still be a building. And overall, I find it hard to accept the arguments that this particular size with these modifications and a slight a change which the officer has said, well, with all of these small tweaks, that we've got to a point where that, well, he says it's acceptable, and the objectors say it's still not acceptable. But I'm if there's going to be a garage there at all, actually, this to me looks as though it would still be okay. It is bigger than the smallest that would be available, but that's not what's being argued against. It's this particular size, and the case officer has said, well, it's okay. Hip roof, windows that don't open, well, that would have to be a condition. It's not there yet. And when we were on site, it wasn't about blocking of light. That wasn't an issue that came up, and indeed the number 6 is set quite low, below a raised car park. The car park must have been built up because it's not on the natural lie of the falling hill anymore. So really, I'd have a problem refusing this. That's me.
Councillor Purnell. Panel.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Could I ask Ms Hall about the statement by the neighbour who said that because it had been demolished more than 10 years ago, it couldn't be a brownfield site, but our officer said it was a brownfield site. So is our officer correct in that?
Chairman, yes. It's a previously developed site, so that makes it a brownfield site rather than a greenfield site.
And Councillor Castle, I think it was, talked about the potential for commercial use. We can condition this, can't we, that it couldn't be used for commercial use?
There is a condition proposed that it is only used for domestics use only, and any change of use would effectively need planning permission.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just thinking about my position.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you. Just in relation to Councillor Abbott's comments about bulk, I mean, if you look at it from this angle, there is a shed to the left, and the size of the rubble heap, I imagine a normal garage would be about the height of the rubble heap, and you can clearly then see the building behind it. It's not above the hedges. It would fit much more neatly in and not obscure the fields behind all the sort of the green A and B landscape. A double-storey garage, which is what this effectively is, will block off a lot of that view and be much more prominent. The sort of varied shed size fits into that much more neatly. I also think 2 bird boxes is interesting in terms of biodiversity. I've never known a bird use a bird box by a garage by choice. When you think what could be done in terms of biodiversity there, it seems a little limp. Thank you.
Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm kind of heading in the same kind of questioning, really, how we could expect, I would hope, better for this site. And I think that's where some of us are kind of thinking about, you know, and I mean, I know it's not for us to determine what people bring forward, but we can look at what is coming forward. And it seems to me, as has been already pointed out, a couple of bird bricks don't really cut it. You know, there's somebody with imagination could do, I mean, don't for me to insult people, but, you know, you could have a green roof here, for example. I mean, I wonder whether we could condition something like that, whether we could condition walls that are, you know, sort of like painted a darker colour, so that in terms of the ONB, it becomes much less visible, because a rendered wall could be bright white, and you can see that from a huge distance. So I just wonder whether we could do some mitigation in the conditioning, that, you know, that's so which maybe sort of fulfills some of the points that are being raised. I really accept that this is a brownfield site. I mean, I get that. But, you know, in terms of biodiversity net gain, we've got the Environment Act coming along any time now to kind of require us to do far more than we have done to date on how we deliver planning. And given that this is kind of what you might call more of a luxury development, because a garage isn't sort of like a basic need in terms of housing, I wonder really whether we could be a little bit more stringent, and I'd be interested in how much closer we could push this to try and make it a lot more acceptable to local people, and maybe a lot more of a genuine gain to the area in terms of things like biodiversity. A green roof can really make a difference. And, you know, if we're looking at 10 to 15%, okay, so the answer is, oh, well, we're starting from zero. Actually, we're not completely starting from zero, because brownfield sites have been assessed to actually, you know, especially when they've been left abandoned for some time, there'd be quite a lot there, actually. It might not be obvious if it's a load of, you know, sort of tiny invertebrates and flies and things. They might not be everybody's first choice on biodiversity, but they are actually all part of our system. So I think we can assess it as naturally, not as a starting point zero. And as I say, a couple of birds that might find a useful place for a couple of months, you know, or may not, because it's making a lot of noise and fumes as a garage. Yeah, I suppose I'm just raising questions really, because I think I'm really caught on this one, because I understand that we don't want to end up in the wrong place, you know, with an appeal. But at the same time, I feel that it's you know, it's not really good enough for us for a site, potentially quite a sort of valuable site because of its position.
Thank you, Councillor Hodge. Mr. Fairbairn would like to respond.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think first of all, the starting point is we're considering the application before us rather than trying to redesign it. I think if members are of the view that they would like to see more by way of biodiversity and the potential for a green roof, then I would suggest that you defer the item so we can go away and have a conversation with the applicant, or his agent, and see what we can achieve. But I don't think you can condition it in the way that's being suggested.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you. I'll come back on Councillor Abbott's comments about size. I don't think that the speakers were talking about size. It was more the height of the building rather than the overall size. If it was a standard garage as opposed to this, I mean, because I got my doubts about the height of this, because we looked at it, we measured, and it's, to me, it's too high for what I'm looking at a standard garage. It wasn't the size of the thing, it was the height, really, Councillor, that I think the speaker was talking about.
Councillor Bonham.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I think, firstly, I want to say that I've got some sympathy with the residents. I mean, they seem to have enjoyed a clear view with no building there for more than 10 years. But I also think the applicant has done a reasonable amount to mitigate some of the issues. I don't think the windows are facing the properties. They seem to be facing the car park space. They're not opening, and I think they've agreed to be shaded or blind covered. I'd like to think about whether we can have a condition to, as other councillors have said, to mitigate some of the other issues. So could we condition that if power is ever connected, there would be EV charging on this, inside this garage? Obviously, it can't be done straight away, but I wonder if that's a condition we could possibly make in due course. Overall, I do take into account the fact that the previous building was there, which was higher, actually, as far as I can tell, compared to the proposal. So, although it's a shame in a way, because there's been 10 years with no building there, I do take that into account. So overall, I'm more inclined to accept this at the moment, based on that previous building. Thank you.
Councillor Bonham. Councillor Nix.
Yes, just coming back on a comment from one of the other councillors. Obviously, the back wall that's facing, that sort of back corner that's facing the number 6 and a little bit to number 8. Thank you. It's going to be very high. Is going to, if you look at where the sun goes, it's going to take away light. We're sort of talking about neighbour amenity here. It's going to be very solid wall at the front there. So yes, it is going to, we're looking, as Councillor Taylor said, not necessarily the bulk of the thing, but actually of the height It's going to overshadow the local, overshadow the existing properties.
Thank you, Councillor Nix. Ms Hall, I was just going to come back. There was the question, if power were installed at a later date, you know, the installation of PVs, EV charging and things like that. Could you respond to that?
Yeah, I thought you were going to ask me that. Potentially, we'd have to look at how we word it, but yeah, potentially we condition on.
Thank you. Councillor Bonham?
Yeah, thank you for your answer on that. Can I move to propose that we accept this application?
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Abbott has seconded this.
With the condition previously mentioned about EV charging.
So, with the condition of non-opening obscure windows. And with the condition of non-opening obscure windows, obscure glazing.
Ms Hall, can we have confirmation of those additional, if the current conditions are considered acceptable, the additional ones, can you just confirm that we've captured those?
Yeah, I think David wants to come in about the EV charging points. Yeah, in terms of the conditions, yeah, we can add the fixed glazing to the obscure glaze condition regarding the roof lights. And also the plan, which is in front of you now, is a revised plan that was submitted last week. Just for some clarity in terms of the width of the garage door, there was a discrepancy between what was shown on the elevations and what was shown on the floor plan. So that was submitted for clarity, and it also includes the section drawing as well. So in terms of the proposed accord with plans condition number 2 within the officer report, I'd also propose that we amend that to make sure that this plan shown up on screen is included within it.
Mr Fairburn.
Thank you, Chairman. I think if one thinks about the conditions for a valid planning condition, or one of the reasons why one has or imposes conditions, it's to make the development acceptable in planning terms. So if what you're saying by way of the condition is that if power is ever installed in this building, then there will be an EV charging point. The reality is, of course, well, the building may never have power and the building will be there. So whatever harm you've foreseen, it's already happened. So I don't think the condition is there to mitigate any harm or to make it acceptable in planning terms, because the building will be there. I don't think it passes the test for a lawful condition.
Okay, I take the point you're making there, but surely one of the clauses in our JLP is around carbon neutrality, and that's what I'm trying to put forward or propose as part of the condition. Is that not a valid request?
I understand the basis for what you're saying, but I think that if you think about the tests are that it has to be necessary, precise, proportionate, and ultimately be with the aim of making the development acceptable. The suggestion from the officer is that what is proposed by biodiversity is proportionate. So that would suggest that you would have to find some additional reason, or you'd have to disagree with his view that it was proportionate. You'd have to conclude that it was necessary to the condition in the terms you've described, it was necessary to make it acceptable. And what I would say to that is, the form of the condition would then normally be that I can't see that you can make or impose a condition which effectively creates something that may never or is reliant upon something that may never happen, make it being used to then make a building that's been built and completed acceptable. It's either acceptable without the EV or it's not. You either conclude that it could do more by way of environmental measures, or it doesn't. And if you think that it is unacceptable without those measures, then it's a refusal. If you're saying that there's some halfway house, well, it must be. You're saying at the moment that the building. Sorry, let me start. The building without EV, if it's built, is acceptable because you've given planning permission for it to be built. It can't not be unbuilt because at some point in the future, electricity power is not provided. It's there. You've granted planning permission for it.
Thank you. Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just wondering whether we could condition land screening, because that, in terms of landscape purposes, surely we can add a condition for that, or a LEMP that would then require some landscape, some consideration of the visual impact, which could mean that we could have screening, which, if that was then kind of natural screening, that would actually enhance the potential for biodiversity. Is that, I mean, I know they're a bit of a tight squeeze on the space there, but it could make a big difference visually.
So,
yeah, I think coming back to what David's just said in terms of looking at the tests and what is in front of us today, I'm not sure that would be reasonable to require landscaping around the side of it.
We quite often do put a LEMP on as a kind of a conditioner, don't we? Or is that when they've already got some sort of...
Again, it's coming back to, is it proportionate? And I would argue that in terms of the scale of development proposed, a LEMP wouldn't be proportionate.
But is that not more fitting, accepting its visual impact and its the fact it's within the AONB?
I hear what you're saying. I guess in terms of the proposal in front of us, the officer has made an assessment that what we have got proposed without any landscaping is acceptable.
Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back on what David was saying about EV chargers. Surely a condition is something that can be actually achieved, and we don't know this can be achieved. That's my take on it. And I don't know if that's correct or not, but I think it's a condition needs to be achievable, which is Councillor Hodgson's come back with screening, and I would have thought that was achievable. Thank you.
Councillor Allen.
This is for clarity, which is sort of relating to the last points made as well. If we're being asked to look and, I suppose, decide for ourselves whether or not something will have a detrimental impact on an AONB, anything that will make that impact lesser, like screening or a green roof, should be regarded or should be taken into consideration in terms of conditions. Or have I got that wrong? Thank you.
I mean, in terms of the green roof, I think that totally changes the proposal in front of us. The proposal in front of us is with a...
I wasn't meaning specific, I'm meaning about the clarity of the actual point being made. So we're saying that we just have to take it as it is in terms of what impact we think it will have on the siting on the AONB, whether it's too large. If we do think it's too large and we do think it will have a detrimental impact, which is a speculative judgment, if we were then to say it would have less of an impact if certain things were done to this building, isn't that relevant to this discussion?
Absolutely. In terms of the landscaping, I'm not sure it would achieve the desired outcome that you're looking for, because any landscaping would be to the sides. You know, it may improve the view for the neighbours, but in terms of the street scene, it's probably not going to achieve much in terms of the outcome you're looking for. And in terms
I'm
of
looking for the bigger point, I suppose, because we're talking about putting conditions onto a site. So are we saying that we can't put conditions onto acceptance of a building, even though that would help us overcome our ideas about our speculative opinion about the way something impacts on a view? It's a bigger. I don't want to be specific about screening or about green roofs or anything, but it sounds coming from you and David that we can't ask for things to mitigate the impact of something effectively. Whereas if that would allow us to accept something which we believe is too large, if there were conditions that that could be put in, which would allow us to accept something, isn't that relevant? Isn't that something part of the planning process? Thank you.
I think, Chairman, I think what we're saying is that in terms of the EV, that is not a law. That would not be a lawful condition. So there's no harm in. So in terms of the landscaping, then the officer view is that it's acceptable as it is, without the landscaping. If you feel that the building is having an impact and and landscaping would mitigate that, then potentially, because we don't have the information as to what would be achievable on site, you can either, I suppose you could grant it subject to a landscaping scheme to be approved, which would be your normal way. But on the other hand, you may feel it appropriate to defer so we can have a conversation with the applicant to find out what is actually achievable on site by way of a landscaping scheme. And then we'll bring it back to you with a view, and then it's up to you whether we'll tell you what is possible, and it's then for you to decide whether that makes it acceptable or not.
Thank you, Mr. Fairbairn. I have a number of other questions, and we're starting to go around in circles here. I'll take Councillor Panel first.
I don't think a landscaping scheme is practical on this site. It's only a very narrow margin around the whole building. You need access down one side to get to the rear door. I presume you'll need to maintain access to maintain the building. I think you might end up with only planting slender trees that are going to be tall growing and will block out the light even more than the garage. I don't think a landscaping scheme is practical, nor should be included in the conditions.
Thank you, Councillor Panel. I'm coming to Councillor Bonham as you were the proposer, because we'd like to move this on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I'll amend my proposal then, if I may, and remove the need for EV charging based on the feedback from the officers, but would like to include the windows, non-opening and obscured windows, and perhaps I can move again the proposal to accept.
Thank you. Still seconded by Councillor Abbott. I'll take Councillor Rake the last question.
Thank you. Can I ask the Councillors Bonham and Abbott if they'd also accept an amendment that we include a condition on the colour of the render, that be approved by officers before? I think that is both mitigation and probably illegal.
Yeah, I'm happy to make that proposed condition.
Thank you, Councillor Rake.
Just confirm that what actually I started talking about screening. I'm not talking about sort of like a 5 acre management sort of plan. I was actually thinking of something like a hazel fence, which can actually occupy about 4 centimetres of actual footprint width-wise. So just to say that that would be a possibility. But anyway,
I think we've gone and covered all the various points on this. I appreciate what you're saying, Councillor Hodgson. I see Councillor Abbott, who's the seconder, sort of hovering there, seeming to want to ask another question. I'll allow that, and then I'll say that's the last.
So the problem with Councillor Rake's suggestion is it hadn't come up in the discussion. What I can see in that photograph from across the way, looking downhill, are other white houses. I know from another town where there was a consistent build over over a whole of an estate of modern buildings, 70s buildings, that they were all white render, and one resident chose to paint it pink, and apparently nothing could be done. So I think the idea of setting a render colour condition seems to me to be, is it too strong to say futile? In a year they could paint it with polka dots.
Councillor Abbott, the question of render was raised during the some of the discussion by one of the members. Oh, Ms. Hall, any?
Yeah, we could control it via condition, if you feel that would be.
Right, at this point, we have a proposer and seconder to accept the officer's recommendation of conditional approval, and we've gone through the conditions quite extensively. Can I have a show of hands for approval, please? Those against?
In favour, 5 against.
That application is approved. Thank you. Thank you, members. Thank you, members of the public. We will now move on. Do you wish a break? A very short break, because we've got officers to prepare to change over as well. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We're all back now, so we will move on to agenda item 6B, which is planning application 226823 VAR, the Cove Guest House at Tor Cross. If we can move on to Mr. Stewart for his presentation, please.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully members will know a little bit about this site. It's got a very extensive previous history, but in terms of location, it's actually situated in quite a discrete part of Tor Cross. The main road through Tor Cross is coloured pink on the attached slide, and the application site is hatched. You'll see that the site extends as far as the high water mark. I should point out that really that's the site ownership extends as far as the high water mark. The application element of the proposed building is located on the left-hand part of the slide behind a seawall, so it doesn't stick out into the sea, is what I'm trying to say. But before I get involved with the application in detail, I think I should appraise members of its extensive previous history. Originally, I think there was a traditional dwelling on the site, which was a guest house, which had been extended over time. And in 2009, an application was approved for a replacement dwelling. It was renewed in 2011. Now, at some stage between 2009 and 2011, the original house was demolished. So the site's been clear since, at the latest, 2011. Over the period between 2011 and 2020, there were 3, maybe 4 applications for variations to the original permission. But the most important application was in 2020, where a certificate of lawfulness was applied for that sought to confirm that the original 2011 permission was not just extant, but had also already been implemented. The certificate was granted, so the applicant has planning permission to build a new dwelling on the site, and that's really important in this case. In 2021, the applicant applied to vary the design of that house, and I'll show you the pictures of what were approved later. And indeed, permission was granted for a new design. More recently, 2 applications to change the design yet again were refused by the council on design grounds. They both went to appeal, and the inspector found in the council's favour. So, in summary, the site not just has been the subject of an extensive series of applications, but it's got permission for a dwelling. In fact, it's got permission for 2 different types of dwelling, and both can be built out. And that is the 2011 permission and the 2021 permission. So he can carry on without any further involvement of the council and build those schemes. The second thing I'd like to just draw members' attention to is the nature of this application. It's an application to vary a condition. In other words, to vary condition 2, which identified a series of approved plans on the 2021 approval, to make further changes to the design of the building. We're not being asked to reconsider the principle of a dwelling on this site, and in fact we can't reconsider the principle of a dwelling on this site. I identify on the slide reference to a court case which related to a seaside property in Cornwall. I bring this up because this was a matter raised by objectors to the scheme and the parish council. The objectors take, and I'm sure that they will express their views in a few minutes, but the objectors' take on the High Court decision was that it allows the local planning authority to review the whole principle of this development again. All I can say is that I disagree. I've had a look at that case in detail, and it does not allow the council to reconsider the principle of the dwelling here. That is also important. So anyway, let's talk about the site. The site, I've outlined the whole of the site area in red as per the application. I've also inserted a green line on the right-hand side of the site area. That identifies the boundary of the SSSI, which is the Slapton Ley SSSI, which extends past this site and includes a part of the tidal area. The blue line on the left-hand side of the dwelling is also important because here it's effectively called a hold the line boundary. This relates to the shoreline management plan, and as people will know that there's been coastal erosion here and beyond the site down at Hall Sands in the past. Over the next, well, could be 20 years, could be 100 years, the loss of the site under consideration may well occur due to erosion. That might or might not depend on sea defences, but at the moment there is no agreed intention to protect this site from further erosion. And as I said on the slide, the site's in the AONB, part of the undeveloped coast, it's part of the heritage coast, and as I said, it's next to the SSSI, and it's in a shoreline management plan. Got everything thrown at it, really. So to the proposals, and I'll show you the proposals in visual form in just a moment. This proposal seeks to very slightly reduce the area of the building over the original 2011 planning permission. It retains the height and massing of what was approved in 2021. The design itself is changed to a very modernistic approach, and I'll probably go on to explain this in diagrammatic form. This slide simply shows the area of the previous permissions. The 2011 permission is outlined in blue, and the 2021 permission is outlined in red, which follows the rectangular building forms that you see.
And can I just ask about the orientation here, because obviously it's different orientation from the outland plans.
Beg your pardon.
I'm trying to find where the coast is.
The coast is down on the southern part here, so you can see the very edge of it there.
Councillor Barnum,
yeah, just to say it's not the southern part.
It's facing east, but sorry, on this south of my screen. Sorry, beg your pardon. So the approved, and I'm only referring here to the east elevation, which is the main elevation, because behind this house is a cliff, but you'll see that in just a moment. The top elevation is that which is approved. At lower ground level, it's a mixture of fenestration, of metal panels, and a bit of natural stonework. The top floor, which is 5 meters in height, so it's a huge, huge top floor, is predominantly glazed, but with some screening, and my arrow is on one of those screens. Those are folding aluminium screens. They're not shutters, they are screens to protect the interior from sunlight. So the screens are not solid, but they fold back into the sections that you see them there and there and at the end there. The current application is shown in the bottom of the screen. It's actually a simpler form of development based on a degree of prefabrication. But here we see, instead of metalwork and other features, straightforward glazed elements, which are clearly shown along the bottom, and stone panelling. The top is almost wholly glazed except for one small section here, which is a solid panel. In terms of height and massing, the building's exactly the same footprint, it's exactly the same height as previously shown. And you will see a little dotted red line here with nothing in that space. That was shown on the original scheme here to incorporate PV panels. The applicant in written form states that he's inserting PV panels in this area, but doesn't show them on the elevation. Now, I haven't shown the full extent of what was permitted because also to the left of my screen there is a raised terrace on the approved scheme, which follows my cursor there, steps down to the lower level. This is repeated here. It's actually a raised swimming pool that was approved on the 2021 application, which is retained in this application but unchanged. So there's no change to anything on the left-hand side and beyond the left-hand side of the design that you see in front of you. In terms of the other principal elevations, I've shown the north elevation of the approved scheme on the top left, compared with the north elevation of what is now proposed, top right, and similarly the southern elevation, bottom left, and the proposed southern elevation, bottom right. Now I have to apologise partly to the applicant because it's slightly unfair. I have attempted to insert the proposal on an earlier perspective that was done for the 2021 application. So it's slightly more basic, doesn't have colour, and is therefore not quite fully representing what you might see if you were standing on the beach. You'll see in the top slide exposed rocks which are there at the top of the beach. There is a form of seawall along here, and the applicant had shown some changes to landscaping in front of the house, together with the house itself, and you'll see there the full extent of the raised swimming pool terrace. The bottom simply shows how the current design fits in, really in terms of size and massing, but the important factor about this picture is that it shows the backdrop. The backdrop is that the cliffs rise fairly steeply behind the dwelling, with the southwest coastal path running along the top here, where my cursor is. And in terms of photographs, I've shown a picture from the southwest coastal path. You'll see just the edge of fencing where a series of steps takes you down to the beach. It's a public footpath. It runs in front of the dwelling that is currently on the site here. You'll see the bottom of the driveway to the site. It climbs very steeply just off picture up to the top of the hillside before dropping down into Tor Cross. The picture on the right-hand side really doesn't show very much, but it's quite important. It's just a little further up the coastal path. You might just see a glimpse of a white rendered chimney there where my cursor is, which is actually that chimney, I think, on the house that's there at the moment. And from further along the coastal path, the picture on the left-hand side shows those dwellings which are visible from the coastal path, but which are set high above the site on the top of the cliff that backs onto Tor Cross there. And then further along the right-hand picture, you can't actually see the site at all. So from the southwest coastal path, it's not very visible except from those steps that I showed you in the first picture. So the key issues with this application. Well, the principal issue is whether the design of the current application is acceptable. It's slightly less adventurous, I have to say, than the 2021 permission. It removes the louvers and removes other elements of detail that are were perhaps better illustrated on the 2021 application than the current. However, I don't believe that those changes materially affect what's already been approved and can actually be built. It simply alters them, and those architectural details, in the officer's view, are still acceptable. In terms of climate change matters, this becomes more important when I talk about some of the objections received. The current proposal clearly indicates in submitted form that it will have PV panels, it will have battery storage, it will have EV charging. It introduces triple glazing as opposed to what I assume was double glazing on the earlier permission. So there are elements in this scheme that are quite clearly attempting to address our DEV 32 policy and the climate emergency planning statement. Now, the only reason I raise this is because there are some objections specifically relating to DEV 32 issues that no doubt will be raised by the objectors later, but which I seek to address here now. I have to say that the earlier permissions do not condition any solar paneling, battery storage, or anything else. So what you see before you, well, it allows us to insert suitable conditions to ensure that those climate enhancement measures are brought forward. There is another issue that's been raised, and that is concern over the seawall and concern over cliff top safety. There is a very dated engineer's report which addressed those matters, but it's dated 2009 and I think was updated in 2011. I think it's reasonable and fair for us to request a further update to assess the current condition of the cliff and the current condition of the sea wall. The works that will happen on site, either through an approval of this scheme or indeed the approval that the applicant benefits from and can implement, will introduce very significant concrete works and foundation works, because a small section of cliff that juts out into the site, if I flick back to one of the photographs, you will see a section that really juts out. That piece of cliff is affected by the raised pool area, so it will be cut back. So there will be some stabilisation within that part of the proposal. Further up, there has been some water-based erosion, not significant, but water-based erosion, hence the reason for requesting an update to the engineer's report. Now, I should outline to members that any works which are identified either to the seawall or to the cliff are not part of this application. They will require their own separate planning permission. So that, for example, where I've dealt with cliff stabilisation before, the simplest form is to provide wire netting support to contain rockfalls. That would require planning permission. So it would be the subject of a separate proposal that could come before members in the future. I believe that the seawall itself is the responsibility of the owner of the site. He can carry out repairs to it, but he can't significantly carry out further significant earthworks or improvements to the seawall without planning permission. And I have to say, without approval from the Marine Licensing Authority and indeed from Natural England in relation to how those works would affect the SSSI. So our conclusion is that the proposed changes to the architectural design are acceptable, that this application allows us to insert conditions that would positively secure DEV 32 objectives, and that we can control and approve separately what might need to happen to the seawall and to the cliff, and therefore we're recommending approval. Now, I should point out that there are a number of further representations received that haven't appeared on the Council's website yet. Those further representations are from the Parish Council, and I believe that they will be addressing you directly. In relation to their further representations, they are concerned particularly about coastal protection, about climate resilience, which they say is questionable in relation to this application. And no doubt they will expand on those themselves. There's also a letter from local residents who are not being represented today, from Sam and Clive Woods. Their concerns relate to those particular matters: climate change, shoreline protection and cliff stability, but also to the principle of development here. Now, I'm putting that to one side because the principle of development here is something that this council has already accepted, and indeed the applicant can build out without further interference from the council. I've also got a letter from the applicant, who apologises for not being here today, but he responds to those climate change proposals. He responds in particular about the amount of glazing, which I think is a matter that may be raised in a few minutes. He says that the amount of extra glazing is only 2.6% greater, but the fact that it's triple glazed, the fact that he's got all sorts of other PV and renewable energy initiatives will bring about improvements to climate change. He also refers to the fact that he has been in discussion with Huff House, that he has had advice from Huff House, but although it's described as a Huff House, he hasn't laid any orders with that company, but that's not really a planning matter at all. And I think that's really where I wish to leave it. I don't really want to go any further into the court case unless there are specific questions about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Any questions, Mr. Stewart? Councillor Allen?
Thank you. Just to be clear, is it a condition of the bill going ahead that the seawall and the cliff are secured first? Do they need to do that first?
As far as we are aware, the seawall is in a satisfactory condition. There has been some damage to it, but the applicant is, I'm sorry, the site owner is allowed to repair the seawall. Is not allowed to modify it by increasing its size. Is not allowed to extend it without planning permission. So he can carry out some repair works, and those repair works are currently protecting the site. Whether they're sufficient to protect it over the next 100 years is entirely another matter. And similarly with the cliff face, if there are measures that are needed to be taken, they will require separate permission.
Right, thank you for that. Just to say that I know this site quite well, and I know sort of over the years that that's been very worn away. The path which used to come at the bottom of this particular area has pretty much disappeared, and I think there's been a sort of hollowing out of the seawall. So it looks like there's potential damage coming up under this site. Isn't that something that the council needs to address before? Because obviously it's changed since the 2011 permission. If there's been extensive erosion to what I would have thought was a fundamental part of the development, isn't that something that we need to consider? Thank you.
The answer to that is no.
Right.
It's a matter for the owner to address. I am aware of ground conditions of the site of the dwelling itself. I'm not aware of the cliff face conditions. What you say might be true, but that's something for the owner to rectify.
Councillor Rake.
Thank you, Chair. Just could you clarify two questions? One is, can you clarify the process? If we were to approve this, the site would be covered by 3 extent permissions, so that they'd have a sort of pick and mix. I mean, is there any mix involved? Could they build aspects of one and aspects of another?
The answer to that is no. They can build one or the other, or if you approved this scheme or this one, they can't pick and mix.
Thank you. You can't sort of knock one off from the beginning of the list by granting this one. You can't.
No.
And just a second minor query: the 2021 application with its folding screens. What's the extent of those unfolded? Do we know?
To be absolutely honest, I don't, but I assume that they would have unfolded to protect the area of glazing from sun. I think that was their principal purpose, so they were a sort of solar screen rather than providing shutters to prevent light escape, shall we say.
I'll take, after this, Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you. So that drawing you've got, the illustration you've put together there, the earlier application, if I'm correct, is bigger than the current one. Is that correct in terms of that front view?
No, the 2021 planning permission, which is the top illustration, is supposed to be exactly the same size as what is now proposed. It's entirely the same height, entirely the same footprint.
Okay, I mean, to be honest, I'm looking at the South Ham Society's submission, which is very interesting and puts these things together. And it looks to me like that 2011 one was 22 metres across, whereas the previous one was 17. The upper one you've got is 17 metres across. And then the current one is 26 metres across. Is that correct? So we're actually looking at a larger kind of, in terms of what's facing into the sea, is the biggest. That one you've got on your where you put those illustrations together, that's the biggest one. Is that correct?
Right. what's on the screen now, the blue outline, the outer blue outline is the total extent of building works that were approved in 2011.
Okay, so it's a lot
Okay.
smaller.
So it's longer, but it's much narrower. I calculated the total length of the dwelling, excluding the pool and terrace, at 25 metres in length, which was the 2011 permission. It's exactly the same in this application.
Okay, so that piece of application that the Southam Society has put in is saying 26 metres or nearly 27 metres long, so that's incorrect. Okay, what I did want to understand though, I mean, is our duty of care to the natural environment, because if we're looking at something now that is much more glazed, we're facing into an SSSI, and a lot of the reasons for that SSSI qualification is that it's about the birds, the bird life, the birds that use the ley, the birds, you know, the migratory birds. Birds are really susceptible to glass. You know, they crash into it, and it looks to me like this is just, you know, a disaster waiting to happen for a lot of the birds that will be flying around. And when you get a storm, they tend to come inland, they're looking for shelter, they get confused, they get flung into things. The second point on that is that, you know, as has been pointed out, the chances are that the sea could come right in here, and we might lose this site. And in which case, we'd end up with a lot of glass in the sea. And I just feel, for me, this feels utterly reckless. And I just want to make that point. And I just wonder how can we exercise what I would feel is a duty of care as being give permission potentially to something worse than what is, you know, from those points of view, than is actually in place.
I have a lot of sympathy with your view. I mean, if this was a fresh application on the site which had no previous history, it wouldn't even get to committee, it would be refused. The original 2011 permission was very different to that was approved in 2021. It didn't have as much glazing. It was of a more, I would say, a more traditional built form, I guess, is the best way to describe it. I'm faced with what I'm faced with, I'm afraid, and that is that the 2021 application was approved, and because it was a variation of the 2011 permission, which has been implemented and can be built out, that too can be built out. So I can only compare the difference between the two schemes. Now, one of the points on glazing that was raised is that the amount of glazing has increased. The applicant stays by 2.6%. I think the objectors say something in the order of 16%. I've had a look. I think really I'd go closer to the applicants. I think it's probably between 12 and 13% increase in glazing on the east elevation. I'm not quite as worried about the other elevations, but that's the predominant one that faces outwards that most people would see either when they're boating or if they can walk along the beach, they would see. Is that sufficient to refuse this design? My view is no, it's not. In terms of those aspects that we can realistically consider could arise out of the additional glazed area, really relates to light pollution, and this is the other element that I didn't cover in the presentation. There's no condition relating to glazing on the earlier permissions, except for non-reflective glass. That's a condition that we can repeat, but we can also insert low emission to that condition, which would secure other glazing related benefits. So I think this gives us the opportunity for a better control, which really, in terms of balance of all the issues, swings the current application round to one of approval.
Councillor Bonham.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for going through this, Graham. And unfortunately, I've got 4 questions to ask, so I'll try and be quick. Firstly, you mentioned the court case, and you pointed out that we should take note of that. But I tried to understand in the notes what that was really sort of guiding us to. Could you summarise if it's important and what we should take account of in the court case, please?
It was for a site that actually was really similar in terms of all the factors that a council needs to consider. It was a site in Cornwall. It had permission for a dwelling, a replacement dwelling. Actually, it was the applicant to this site that owns that Cornwall site. He applied to vary the design of the dwelling. Cornwall Council refused the application. They did not refuse it on design grounds. They refused it on the ground that the variation was so different to the original permission that it couldn't be treated as a minor amendment. Okay. The applicant went to appeal. I think the inspector found in favour of the council, and the applicant then took it to the High Court. And the High Court judgment was very clear that if you are seeking to vary a condition, and in this case change the plans to what was approved, the basic permission that was originally granted remains the same, a dwelling on the site. And there is no restriction on what you can change to that, provided the operative part of the permission remains the same, i.e. a single dwelling. You can change the design completely and consider it as a Section 73 application. So that was really the basic finding of that court case.
Okay, thank you. The second question is regarding the cliff wall and the stability of the cliff. There's a separate planning permission that would need to come before, presumably before this committee or planners. So is the application, I'm a bit confused, is this application, that this application is not conditional on that? On the other hand, is the building of this house conditional on the cliff and or the seawall changes being approved?
No, it's not. The applicant can go ahead and, if you approve this, he can go ahead and build this. If it's later washed away, that's his responsibility. The simple fact of the matter is that, as far as we are aware, the current seawall, whilst it may require repair, is of a satisfactory nature to protect this site at this moment in time. And similarly, the condition of the cliff is acceptable at this moment in time. However, we have requested, as part of a condition, an update to the earlier engineer's report for confirmation of that. And if further works, if the engineer considers further works are required to stabilise the cliff, then subject to a planning application, and similarly the seawall.
Okay, thank you. All right, my third question is about your notes, and you say 40 in line 45. I conclude that although the development conflicts with a number of adopted policies, it's balanced by basically Dev 20. Could you just summarise, because there's a lot of issues here, could you just summarise very quickly for me, if you don't mind, what this application conflicts with, in your opinion?
This application conflicts with Dev 25. It conflicts with light pollution. it conflicts with a number of other policy considerations that you would normally take into account on a new application. What I was really trying to say was that actually those still exist, but what is material here is the fact that you've already approved a house. And you've already approved a house of a certain design, and what I'm actually looking at, I have to take those matters into account. So there are a number of policy conflicts. If this was a new application, you would refuse. But that there are material considerations here that you have to set aside policy conflicts.
Okay, thank you. My fourth question relates to the other two planning permissions which were rejected. So this one, as an example, 004322, and there's another one as well, which is 211022. This was rejected and I think was sent to appeal and also rejected on appeal. And basically the reason was that the proposed dwelling by reason of mass, blah, 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 is out of character and contrary to AONB, etc., etc. My question to you is, have you compared the new proposal with the two that were previously rejected in terms of their size and height?
I could give you a one-word answer, yes. However, I didn't consider those applications, but I did the appeals, and I did the appeal statement. The appeal proposals for both were very different to this in terms of their design, principally. They did vary in terms of scale very modestly, because what you actually have on the approved scheme and on the current application you're considering is a lower ground floor of about 2.8 metres floor to ceiling height, which is bigger than a normal domestic dwelling. And on the first floor, a 5 metre floor to ceiling height, which is huge. That is 2 stories. Both those applications that you refer to, which the council refused, related to a development that was 3 stories in height, but contained largely within the overall height of what we've currently approved in 2021. As originally submitted, they both had pitch roofs, and the ridge height of those roofs were in fact higher than the approved house that you see on the top of your screen. The revisions made during the application altered the roof configuration to a flat roof, but we still had 3 full stories, each with, so there were 3 levels within what is a fairly simple, if you pardon the word, and clear 2-level dwelling. And those were the considerations that the inspector had to consider, and he considered them, like ourselves, unacceptable. What we have now is a 2-level scheme. Okay, it's tall, but it's the same height as what this council has already approved.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you. It seems to me that we're the sort of part of this application is its positioning right on the beach. So I know that this beach is well used by lots of families, lots of children. My concern is that the thing that it seems to be worse about the previous application is being made even more worse, if you pardon that, by this new application, which is the glass. So the glass is potentially a problem for the bird life. It's also, I would have thought, potentially a problem for the privacy of the people on the beach, because at this point in time, instead of a relatively secure place for children, they're going to be faced with this wall of glass with people sitting in the rooms watching, I imagine, potentially, the people on the beach. Does this come into planning at all, the fact that privacy of a public beach? Thank you.
Gosh, I've never been asked that question before. The short answer is I will throw it back to you and say you've previously considered it and you've considered it entirely acceptable because we've got an approved scheme.
I was not on the council then.
No, I appreciate that, but if it is a consideration, and I don't think it is, to be honest, but I wait to be advised. No, it's really the privacy and the amenity of the occupiers that is normally the principal consideration. Here, it's obviously their choice. They like to be seen. Who knows? I don't know.
Mr. Fairburn, you want some clarification?
Yeah, just on the privacy point, I would say that because it's a public beach, there's a low expectation of privacy. So it's not a material consideration.
Thank you. If there are no more questions of Mr. Stewart, we will move on to those other representations today. And we have Mr. Pawley, who's the objector. Mr. Pawley, if you settle yourself in, you've got 3 minutes, and if you can, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I've watched this beach dwindle over my lifetime. The change in the last 10 years has been greater than 10 before that. Rocks are visible that have never been exposed before, and the sea regularly covers the entire beach. When a section of the seawall, which is quite large and significant actually, was destroyed in 2018 by Storm Emma, and the planning permission lapsed in 2020, it really seemed as though the prospect of overdeveloping the cove site with a crass glazed box had died. Unfortunately, this was not the case, and the scheme has been resurrected. This drawing, by the way, is actually, the top one is from 2015. So it was given permission in 2021. It's actually much older than that. It probably suggests that, if it had been put forward, it's only because of the precedent that it's been allowed in 2021. This whole thing has also been before this council previously. And I'm not sure I ever understood how it passed then. But I think, particularly the size of it, 5 metre upper level. You look at the drawings, look at how tiny a figure is of a human being. And this cove is only 160 metres wide. It's really unbelievable. But anyway, it passed. But I think really, this is now a chance to correct that mistake. Because we do face a climate crisis. And the planning precedent may suggest that the council must give blessing to a scheme that's really so far out of step with our time, would be rejected automatically if proposed today. But there is actually a greater and more important general precedent at stake. Is government actually going to do anything about climate change and protecting places like our precious AONB? Or is government merely going to talk a good game and dodge the difficult decision? The applicant has 2 different planning permissions and can start building either one if he wishes. While it may be too much to expect those permissions to be rescinded, would it be such a bad idea for the council to say that due to the climate emergency and related coastal vulnerabilities, it won't entertain a Section 73 variation that runs contrary to current planning policy? Isn't this exactly the kind of brave and responsible political decision we need to start seeing more of? That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Pawley. Any questions, Mr. Pawley? Councillor Allen.
Hi. When you say you've seen further deterioration of the seawall and of the cliff face, so the picture at the top that you mentioned here, would you say that was representative of the seawall? Sorry, yes. Sorry, yes.
No, that's been taken before the seawall was destroyed. So because this scheme's actually from 2015, the planning officers kind of made it sound like it was approved in 2021, but it's actually much older than that. Just so you know. So this is obviously before the seawall was destroyed in 2018. So that's a kind of photo montage visualization thing.
Can you explain, with that picture in mind, what the difference is, because in my understanding that it's possibly about a metre back, there seems to be an awful lot of green in front of the picture, which I don't believe can exist anymore.
Yeah, it's difficult to explain, but I guess it's kind of, yeah, we don't we don't have a current picture, but that would give you an idea. Yeah.
So on that picture, the silver.
No, it's, if you go right to the left, there isn't a head-on picture. I mean, I've submitted, I think, numerous ones over the years showing the seawall, but it's a large area. I'd say approximately 5 meters wide. You see, the seawall's based on the rocks that go up from the beach, so it's built around the rocks. So where the rocks are, it's okay, but then the seawall's collapsed around that area, and then over time, when you've had quite rough weather, the sea's obviously lapped up against that and eroded it more. But there hasn't really been another really serious easterly wind and high tide to kind of finish off the job. But, I mean, you'd have to say it was kind of imminent unless something is done to repair it. But yeah, it's a significant area. I wouldn't minimise the damage to the seawall.
No further questions? Councillor Rake.
Thank you, Chair. Calling for a brave political decision is, I mean, it would be foolhardy of us to, we can't rescind the previous application. So really, I think we need to, I mean, we haven't seen so far the first application, which is an entirely different design. But comparing the 2021 approval and this one, to my mind, and I welcome being put right, but they're of a very similar aesthetic. I mean, the one that's approved and the one now before us are aesthetically very similar. They're both, and it's an aesthetic that we're seeing increasingly. I'm not sure that I'm a big fan. It's quite clear that you're not. But the difference between the two, the approved one and the one before us, for you, the main harm of the latter relative to the former would be what exactly?
I mean, I think you're correct that there isn't a great deal of difference. I think the overhangs on the first one and the louvers, there's been more effort to mitigate the extensive glazing. I mean, I think both of these things, the problem isn't so much the style, the problem is the scale, the gratuitous size of these buildings. It's extraordinary, really. So, and I agree, you can't rescind what's been given, but I think actually you just make it as difficult as possible, because this is clearly, I mean, just a kind of suicide project. You know, it just flies in the face of everything we know about where the world's going, where our coastline's going. And I think it would be worth taking a stand, and I think it would be interesting to see where it ended up. Because if you could say, we're not interested because of climate change, that could have, you know, quite serious ramifications for other areas. And I think these are the kind of steps people need to be taking.
Councillor Abbott.
So, hi. I think Simon's really getting to the nub of the issue, though. We're not going to rescind. We have no power to do so, and we would be sued. This council would lose a lot of money, and it would be refunded by council taxpayers' precept. So it's not going to happen. And as I understand the debate that is before us, is which of these objectionable designs would you prefer? Is it better to go with the improvements which the architect and the client has tried to move forward on this latest version, or would you prefer that earlier one?
Well, as I say, I'm not expecting you to rescind existing planning permission, but I'm saying I think there is a possibility you could refuse Section 73 variations because it simply doesn't match up with current policy. The question of which I prefer, given that the applicant has said that he finds the first one to be too expensive, let's go with that, because there's less chance of it being built. And I would say, actually, and indeed, you know, I had a meeting with the officer. We had a site visit, and it's probably not that realistic to build something like this there. You know, and the reason that probably there isn't more interest and more representation from people in the village is people think it's very unlikely that this will be possible to build. But, you know, I still think it should be challenged because you never know. And also, actually, if you start to knock this kind of thing back and you end up in a more realistic level of development, you know, not this sort of James Bond house, then there's more chance you actually get a house there, if that's what you want.
Thank you, Mr. Pawley. If there are no further questions, thank you, Mr. Pawley. We do not have supporter representation, but we do have Stokenham Parish Council. Parish Councillor Spence, thank you. I think you know the form.
I do, Mark. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Much of what I had to say has been undercut by Ollie. We don't compare notes, but I know I haven't got long. You know about the widespread opposition to the proposal from residents, the parish council, the South Ham Society, and many others. It's based on, as we've said, the bulk, the scale, the massing, the amount of glazing, the enormous carbon footprint of the concrete raft that's going to have to be built right across the entire site. I mean, there are hidden climate change costs to this project that have not been brought out in Mr. Stewart's otherwise excellent and comprehensive report. Just to remind you, the site sits wholly within the AONB, the Heritage Coast, the designated undeveloped coast. It borders the SSI and the area of impact of the SSI. It's in the coastal change management area, under which no work ought to be taken that risks exacerbating the risk of coastal change. It's in flood zone 2/3. It's seaward of the Hold the Line designation, and according to the current shoreline management plan, it is likely, or it may be, underwater within as little as 20 years. So, I mean, that is the full house of no-nos in terms of development, and yet we're seriously proposing to put this enormous glass and steel box in a prominent, highly visited part of the AONB. Now, I understand that we're between a rock and a hard place. We have a rock, we're being offered a hard place. We don't have to accept the hard place. We can say, we'll stick with the rock. As I said, Mr. Stewart's report was comprehensive. Unfortunately, it didn't bring out the objections quite as extensively in its visually presented form as it did in its written form. So I hope we've all had the chance to read that. Despite the weight of evidence in that report, Mr. Stewart unfortunately and inexplicably reaches the wrong conclusion, which is that it's inevitable that this is going to be built. I say it's not inevitable. There's nothing inevitable about this. You members have the right to say this will not be built. Yes, something will be built, but not this. And I go back to the inspector's comments, and I'm going to quote from what she said. And I can't imagine that she's referring specifically to the fine design details. I find the amended scheme would be incongruous with the surrounding built form due to its height, scale, and bulk, and would also be a discordant feature in the rugged coastline. It would therefore cause unacceptable harm to the character and appearance of the area, and would not conserve or enhance the AONB or conserve the character of the undeveloped coast. It would conflict with policies SPT1, DEV 10, DEV 20, DEV 21, DEV 23, DEV 24, and DEV 25 of the local plan, which seek, amongst other things, to deliver high quality, sustainable housing that contributes positively to the townscape and landscape. Members of the committee, you have got one question. The question before you is this: has the proposal changed substantially enough to materially alter the inspector's judgment? If you conclude that it has not, you have every right to refuse it, and all the policy reasons you need, and I hope that you do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Spence. Any questions? Councillor Bonham.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Spence, for that. Just to be really clear, that statement you read at the end was from which application, please?
The inspector's report was the two that you made, the 2023, May 2023 appeal dismissal.
Okay, so from the, if I may, from cases 004322 or 211022. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Councillor Allen.
Hi. As a person representing local people, I wanted to ask you about the safety of the beach because, or to correct me if I'm wrong with any of my following suggestion. So I know that the path leading down to the beach has had major damage in the last few years. I know that they cut off the opening for the little river to come through because it was dangerous. I know that they have then, this is all, in case people don't know this site, it's all very close, it's all sort of butting onto this site. I know that they have closed part of the old World War II bunker because of safety issues. I know that there's certain parts of that beach you shouldn't be standing under because you get hit by rocks and I mean it's a seriously fairly dangerous section of the beach. This seems totally flying against the face of reasons that you would put an enormous glass house, which is being undermined, as you say, for the seawall disappearing. So it's undermined from below. It's in danger of being hit from above. It's being undermined on both sides. So it's actually quite difficult to access this beach now, although families come around the rocks and by the side. Am I wrong in any of the things I say?
You've got most of it. There's a few more bits. I mean, the steps are called breakneck steps for a reason. The area is extremely problematic because it's very active. The outflow from the Lee runs under in a ancient engineered tunnel, runs under the rock and comes out. And South Hams engineers and Devon County have put in sluice gates over the last few years because every time you get a southerly storm, the shingle binds up in front of the gate, stops it opening, and the Lee overflows, and you get massive flooding into Torcross. Lots going on there. The seawall, as Ollie has already mentioned, is severely damaged in lots of places. And this idea that they have permission to repair the seawall is for the birds. I mean, they have permission, technical permission. But if I sit on the Slapton Line Partnership, and I'm telling you, just getting one extra rock onto the Slapton Line in the face of objections from Natural England is a nightmare. So the idea that they're going to be able to go down to the Triple SI shoreline and start piling on reinforcements on the seawall is for the birds. It's not going to happen. The cliff space, the cliff face, Mr. Stewart said there was some water erosion. Yes, there were actually little rocks falling down the day we visited. Small little bits of waterborne pebbles coming down from cracks in the cliff face behind. I mean, there's so much about this site that is problematic. We just haven't begun to scratch it, and it's terribly complex, and it's very difficult to imagine the complexities of this situation getting over without you having to read an enormous amount more than you've read, and also take a short course in geotechnical engineering.
Councillor Panel.
Thank you. Could you just outline again your reasons why you think this application is significantly worse than the 2021 approval? What are the key points that we should consider?
Well, I could give you an architectural appraisal, but I have no expertise in that area. The 2015 application, which is what's there, the applicant doesn't want to build because he's realised it's going to cost him a huge amount of money.
But this was approved in 21, presumably.
Well, yes, it was, but I don't quite know how that happened. It happened in the face of all the opposition and parish council, but we don't need to go there. The point is, he doesn't want to do it because it's going to cost him too much money. Having got down to the site and realised just what's involved in terms of bringing material in, there's no access from Torcross on the main road. At one stage, he was thinking of bringing material up the hillside in an absolutely harebrained scheme that he must have taken one look at and thought, that's not going to happen. So he's going to be coming down Torchurch roads from Matscombe Cross, very narrow, sometimes only...
I think that's not really addressing the question I asked, which is comparing the two proposals.
My final point on that is that the situation the council finds itself in is, and seems to be, the officer seems to be recommending towards, is because you have granted these two permissions, you must grant this third one because you've nowhere else to go. And my point is to echo Ollie's, to say, no, just say we're not granting any more Section 73 changes of plans. You don't have to. These new plans don't meet all of the policies that we've mentioned that they butt up against. So you can just build what you've got permission for, or not at all. And my view would be that quite quickly there would be no building happening because it's simply impractical to build this. No one in Torcross believes it ever happened. It's a marquee project, and I don't talk about the individual, but he has form in Cornwall.
Councillor Spence, can we just have a point of clarification from Ms. Hall? Thank you.
Yeah, I was just having a look at the appeal decisions from the 2 refused applications, and I know the inspector's judgment or decision was released in May of this year, so it's relatively recent. And obviously the schemes were dismissed, and that was because of design concerns. But I just wanted to draw members' attention to paragraph 17 because there has been, and 18 and 16, sorry, because there has been a lot of discussion about whether the existing fallback schemes. So in terms of paragraph 17, first of all, my attention has been drawn to the increased costs of construction, the approved schemes. However, I have limited substantive evidence before me demonstrating that they could not be constructed, irrespective of my decision on the appeals. Furthermore, given the planning history and the appellant's efforts through the planning system to sustain the site's readiness for a new dwelling, a significant level of commitment has been demonstrated. Therefore, I conclude that there is a greater than theoretical prospect that either of the 2 approved schemes could be constructed, and I attach substantial weight to these fallback scenarios. So I just wanted to raise that point, and I think if we were to refuse it based on the fact that there is potentially no fallback, or we don't want the previous ones, or we don't think that they could come forward, we would potentially be open to significant costs, as we've already discussed. And it might just be worth drawing your attention to paragraph 16, where comparison is made with the approved designs. Although of significantly different designs, both approved schemes will provide a 2-storey dwelling and will be sited to minimise visibility from the beach. Additionally, both approved schemes incorporate features and materials in the beachside facade that would break up this elevation and would limit the emphasis on the height of the dwelling, irrespective of its face area in comparison with the amended scheme. Whilst the overall volume of the amended scheme is marginally less than the approved schemes, it would be concentrated closer to down steps, and combined with the emphasis on the 3 storeys would have a bulkier appearance than the approved schemes. Consequently, notwithstanding the use of large amounts of glazing or similar external materials, the inspector concluded that the amended scheme would be more harmful to the character and appearance of the approved scheme. So I just wanted to raise your attention to that.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Councillor Rake, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I'd understood what you were saying, Mr. Spence. You don't think either scheme will be built, and so what are we doing here?
No, I think they might be built, but I think it's significantly less likely they'll be built than the current one, because I think they will be significantly more expensive, and I think there are significant practical barriers to them being built due to the nature of bringing prefabricated sections onto the site.
Sorry, when you say less or more likely than the current one, which is the current one?
Than the current proposal.
Are there any?
Obviously, that's.
Are there any further questions of Councillor Spence? No. Thank you. We now move on to the ward councillor, Councillor Brazil.
Thank you, Chair. I think most of the aspects have been covered, and but as you can see from the planning history, there's extensive planning history, and I hope you can understand the frustration of the community. Not, there's very technical reasons as to why a variation Section 73 has been used. Some people might feel that that's just a war of attrition by applicants. I think that unfortunately, that's the law of the land. That's been proven in the High Court, that we have to go along with that. So when you're deciding this application, I think you need to be absolutely clear about on what grounds that you're deciding it. And I think the committee has highlighted that now and again by saying, what's the difference between the one at the top and the one at the bottom? And is there a significant material difference between the one at the bottom and the one at the top that would mean that you'd refuse it. And that's really, in a way, all you can ask. I appreciate about the beach and the danger to the beach. I very much hope that the condition, if it is passed, the condition says that if you can't come up with a scheme that means that the land is stabilised, then you can't build the house. But I'm not quite sure where the law stands on that. As Councillor Spence has said, it's very unlikely that any extensive protection to that seawall would be allowed, because we can't even protect the road along the line because it's a triple SI. So the idea that they're going to allow it for a private dwelling would be, I think Natural England would stymie any attempts to put in any significant defence on that will. So it may be that if you refuse it, you're actually doing the applicant a favour, because if to build it there, it's only going to disappear in 20 years' time. Putting all that aside, I personally view the one above as better as the one below. The one above, I mean, I think that what you have to understand, it's always about degrees. Is the one on the top there, did that just squeeze through on a subjective call? Did it look okay? And will the one below be worse, and as such has passed that difference? And then at the same time, you have to balance that with the fact that there are Dev 32 mitigation put into the new one, which weren't necessarily there in the one above. So those are other things that you have to balance. My own view that I feel, I'm disappointed. First of all, the applicant isn't here to answer questions, but secondly, the applicant hasn't provided with some kind of mock-up of what that one below, and you can draw your own conclusions from that. But from the pictorial evidence that we've got there, I would say that that bottom one is worse than the top one. I think that the way that the top one breaks up, there's some asymmetry about it, which actually lends itself to the landscape behind it. There's less glass on that particular facade. I appreciate that there's arguments about how much in total, but I think that is the facade that we're looking at. The new one is pretty much all glass and pretty sizable at that, with light pollution. I would say that although they are similar, the one below is worse, and as such, I would hope that you would find that you would be able to refuse it on those grounds. But I think you need to be very clear and concise in your reasons why you might refuse it. And some of you may think, actually, no, that isn't a big enough reason, and actually I would approve. But I think that if you start talking about the safety of the walls or the beach and things like that, or the fact that you're going to allow a house at all there, that is that's not relevant to actually this discussion. I'll leave it there, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brazil. Any questions of Councillor Brazil? No? Thank you. Right, we'll move into the debate on this. Who wishes to start? Councillor Rake.
Thank you, Chair. Well, as Councillor Brazil's just said, I mean, I think rightly or wrongly, we can't relitigate the past. And so it does come down to comparing the application before us now with the two extant approved applications. As I say, so the one 2011, or the first one, is aesthetically very different to these, in a sort of coastal whimsy style, and then there are these two that are aesthetically much more similar to each other. I think that a lot of the comments that we've heard apply equally to both, and so don't really enter into the balance. I think they both need a concrete slab underneath them. They both have significant areas of glazing that we can discuss. So I'm finding it very difficult to. I like the voluntary adoption of the Dev 32 measures. The triple glazing, I think, is positive. The battery storage, etc. So I'm really yet to be convinced that there's sufficient difference between the two that we see, apart from one's in colour and the other's in black and white, between the two we see on the screen there, to warrant refusal. But I could easily be convinced.
Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you, Chairman. I recognise that we have to, in some ways, pick our words carefully, because as much as we may have kind of personal shock, horror sense of any of this going in there and wish it away and would grasp at things that have been mentioned, like, well, it's not going to go for the other one because it'd be too expensive to deliver. I mean, it's very tempting, but I know that that is not really how we can manage this. So I would kind of really invoke the greater standards that we have brought in about carbon footprints, carbon measures, which I recognise to some extent has been brought in. But also, you know, we're looking at biodiversity. I mean, if this is a bigger space, and as I raised earlier about our duty of care to nature, in some ways to me, this is going in the opposite direction, because this is a really special site in terms of wildlife. And so I think we should invoke whatever we can, any development, to actually support the biodiversity, which is so threatened. When you've got a lovely, really wonderful wildlife area, we should be making a maximum opportunity to ensure that anything that goes in can really take advantage of that and, you know, raise that 10%, 15%, whatever we want to do. And I don't see any of that with this. In fact, I see the opposite, because the more glass, the more you've got somewhere for the birds to crash into and to have an impact on lighting and all the rest of it around the area. So I would actually just say, I would just cut to the chase and go a bit simple on this one in some extent, and use Councillor Spencer's very wise words. And I shall just quote, I shall propose that we refuse, and on the basis of the inspector's conclusions at the last application, because I think they also apply to this new proposal too. And I would say that it's the design of the amended scheme would be incongruous with the surrounding built form due to its height, scale and bulk, which I think is important, and would also be a discordant feature in the rugged coastline. You can't really argue with that. It would therefore cause unacceptable harm to the character and appearance of the area, would not conserve or enhance the OMB, or conserve the undeveloped character of the undeveloped close. It would conflict with policies SPT1, Dev 10, Dev 20, Dev 21, Dev 23, Dev 24, and Dev 25 of the local plan, which seek, amongst other things, to deliver high quality, sustainable housing that contributes positively to the townscape and landscape, including the AONB and undeveloped coast. I also find conflict with chapters 12 and 15 of the framework, which seeks to achieve high quality, beautiful and sustainable buildings and places and aim to conserve or enhance the natural environment. And I think that holds for this, and I absolutely agree that that's what we can, I would like to propose that we refuse on that basis, despite the efforts that have been made to, think about the carbon footprint, triple glazing, fine, but I think that's still going to mitigate against the wildlife. So that's my 2 pennies.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. We've had a proposal for refusal. Do we have a seconder? Seconder, Councillor Allen. We are early in the debate, and I have 2 other councillors who have requested to speak. So I am going to take those councillors ahead of any vote. Thank you. Councillor Bonham.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I think this is quite a difficult application that we need to really think carefully. So I appreciate the chance to give my views on it. I think in an application like this, where there's been so many previous applications, we need to think really carefully about consistency and being mindful of what's been approved and rejected in the past, and compare the proposal on the table today with what's been seen before and either approved or rejected before. So in that, I spent quite a lot of time looking at the 2 previous applications, the ones that I mentioned before, 0043 and 2110. And what surprised me was that this new application is basically the same size as those 2 rejected. And they were rejected, and as been mentioned before, the application went to appeal. This is 9 metres high, this new application. I don't know the length of it, 40 something metres. It's the same height as the previous two, which were both 3-storey, but they were exactly the same height as this new application. And I don't think that looking at this new application, I don't think the fact that this is 2-storey versus the 3-storey is very, very impactful on the, certainly not on the scale and the size and the massing and the visual impact. So I think we've got to be careful what question we answer. It's not so much, is this better than the 2015 application, but how does it compare with with both 2022 applications, which were both rejected and rejected on appeal? And we've heard the reasons. I also feel that we need to balance the failure of this to meet DEV 25 and sort of compare that with the beneficial aspects around carbon and DEV 20, I think it is. So overall, I'm inclined not really to support this at the moment. And I think we need to be very careful about approving something that was similar to 2 applications that were very recently rejected. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bonham. Councillor Panel.
Thank you. I think, as Councillor Brazil said, the key issue is what are the differences between this and the past applications that would give us the reason to refuse it. I think one of the key factors is the amount of glass. And can I just ask, Mr. Stewart, you thought the increase in glass over the last approved application was about 11 or 12%?
That was my calculation, yes.
I think I can recall us debating another application in another place on a creek in Dartmouth about a year or so ago, where the officers recommended refusal, and one of the concerns was the amount of glass and the light from that, and that would be overlooking a very small secluded creek, and we approved it, but with conditions that really restricted the amount of glass. We changed the amount of glass there was going to be. I think we can argue that the increase of that amount in the amount of glass on what is a really conspicuous site is going to be visible for much of Start Bay. I think that is one material factor which we can use as a reason, if we want to, for refusal.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to comment? We have.
Sorry, I was just going to say I've just flashed up on the screen one of the elevations that of one of the appeal proposals that was dismissed.
Can I just check? It's the same height as the current proposal, isn't it?
I think this one is, yeah.
We have a proposer and seconder for refusal. Councillor Hodgson has put forward an extensive number of reasons for that refusal. I saw also from Councillor Panel that there was an additional comment in there as about glazing for refusal. Can I have some clarification from Mr. Fairburn as to the acceptability of these points?
I think, Chairman, that I think the first thing to say is that what you're needing to compare is the impact of the previously approved scheme with the proposal before you, rather than the previously rejected schemes, which were different, and for the reasons that the inspector has pointed out in her decision letter, saying that there were benefits to the approved scheme and that they were better related into the landscape, etc. So I think your starting point has got to be the comparison with the scheme that has been approved. And I think I agree with Councillor Brazil's approach that it's better to be more focused than it is to be, if you're going to be minded to refuse it, to be more focused in your reason for refusal, because some of the reasons that have been quoted apply equally to the schemes that we have approved. So I would suggest that the proposer and the seconder may want to think about more in lines of along the lines of what Councillor Pannell has suggested, if that is the way the committee is minded. I think potentially what has been proposed is going too far and risks being unreasonable. But essentially, I think as a decision-making process, it's a case of comparing the position with the fallback that there is, and this scheme could be built out. You've heard no evidence to say that it can't. You have heard opinion that it can't, oh, it won't, but you've got no evidence to say that. So on the face of it, there is a lawful fallback that could be implemented tomorrow, or has been implemented and could be built out tomorrow. And the question is whether or not this scheme is better than the scheme that could be built tomorrow. And that's a matter of your judgment, particularly in light of the concerns you've raised over Dev 32. But I would urge you as a committee to think perhaps more narrowly in terms of your reasons for refusal, if that's the way you're going.
Councillor Hodge.
Thank you. To a large extent, we're actually really flying blind here. If you look at the application site, you won't find any comment from Natural England, no ecology report. There's no other of those usual stakeholder reports that we can actually use to help give us some professional guidance on this. So we're having to just look at what we see and you know, the objections that have been raised and use our own knowledge and our own principles. But I mean, some of those stakeholder reports can be really useful and also would give us a much more updated, because, you know, this has been going on for a long time. So I thought it was really useful to look at the inspector's report. I mean, I'm looking at Southam Society's comments, and they've you know, articulated it really well, which is very helpful. And I think that, you know, the inspector is looking at what was proposed to him or her at that point compared to the one above. And I think this new one falls into exactly the same, you know, I think it had, you know, the same point supply, because that, you know, there's not a lot of difference between what's being offered here compared to those other schemes that were refused. So we're actually, there is a consistency, and I think that it's important to nail it in every which way we can on this, because I think it's, you know, as I say, because we haven't got those other things that we can reach to and use, you know, Natural England or whatever. I mean, this, given the value of this site, I'm really shocked that we haven't had those reports. I would fully expect those comments to have been sought, because it seems, and there's no, I'm not being rude about because I think the case officer has done a really good job here actually, but you know, it is hard on us. So I think when the inspector has given us a full sort of palette of really good reasons, I think to use that, and I would fully accept Councillor Pannell's addition to that as the main mover here of refusal. For me, that it really sets it out very clearly, because it's linking in those elements that would otherwise have been brought together by the stakeholders that normally have reported in as well.
Thank you, Councillor Hodge. I'd like to bring in Mr. Stewart at this point.
With regard to biodiversity, which was one of the issues you raised, the application, one of the previous applications was the subject of an ecology report, and indeed the permission was granted subject to an ecological condition. The principal value of this site relates to reptiles. Obviously, it's a very good site for them. Got areas of hard standing where they can bask, and it's got areas of cover. That continues to be covered in this application. With regard to the AONB partnership, I can't honestly say whether they were consulted this time, but I know that the 2015 application raised an objection from them. I think they've consistently objected to the principle of development on this site. Sorry, redevelopment, I should say. But I can't advise you otherwise. I don't honestly know about Natural England and what they commented on previous proposals.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. And we move on from here, but certainly, Councillor Hodgson, you are sticking with your guns by the sounds of it.
I'll stick to that unless one of the planning officers wants to kind of constrain it a bit more or give an alternative offer. But I don't want to. I don't want to lessen the power of the refusal. That's what I'm trying to say. And if it's the inspector's words, how can it? If it went to appeal, how can an inspector criticise another inspector? Well, I suppose they can, but it's if it's come from an inspector. I mean, far better person than me to list these things out. But I just feel there's a lot of very good reasons that I think are well set out there to refuse this. And because it's coming forward later now, I think we have because it's dragged out. I don't think we should be caught into kind of judging it on the basis of what was going on in 2009. We only declared a climate emergency here in 2019. I mean, a lot of us were worrying about it earlier than that, but nevertheless, that's when it came into real being here. And I think we have the right to kind of recognise that in what we're kind of trying to push now, and the fact that we had a new piece of planning work policy that we brought in ourselves just a few months ago, which I think is already relevant. Otherwise, we're just laying ourselves wide open to any of those things not mattering with variations.
I am going to recommend, given the sort of debate, to allow the officers to consider this and consider what you've said, to have a short adjournment for them to prepare something to come back to guide us on this. So I will ask for 5 minutes and we'll break now and then return. Thank you. Councillors, if we can come to order, please. Thank you. Ms. Hall, can you outline the decision?
Thank you. Okay, so in terms of, we've listened to the debate and where we think the refusal's going. We don't think what's been proposed is sustainable and would stand up at appeal. So we haven't had a discussion. If you were minded to refuse, we would suggest something along the lines of the design quality with specific reference to the increased fenestration and light pollution, with the exact wording to be delegated to the head of DM in consultation with the chair and vice chair and the proposer and the seconder.
Councillor Hodgson.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that sounds very, very positive. What I would just ask though, am I not understanding correctly that there's a slight difference in the overall bulk? Is this slightly bigger overall or not? Because if it is, then I think we should add that in, and if it's not, we won't.
Slightly bigger than what? I suppose I ought to ask first.
The last approved scheme, sir.
No, the last approved scheme, it is exactly the same size.
I'm happy to accept that proposal from the officers.
I think in terms of any change in bulk, it seems to be so minimal, and when you compare the two schemes, we wouldn't want to include that as a reason for refusal, would be our recommendation.
Councillor Bonham, don't wish to restrict, but is it meaningful to sort of the conclusion?
Yeah, well, I'm just wondering, because we've already heard that Dev 25 is not complied with. As the officer said, just put that on the table if that's helpful or not.
Can I just say that Dev 25 wasn't complied with when you when the council approved the previous scheme. So it's a consistent, contrary to policy thing that I don't think you can raise as a new ground of refusal.
So Stuart, I think I can say, Councillor Bonham, you were concerned about consistency, so we need to be consistent. We have a recommendation. Georgina, did you agree? That's what, right, okay, thank you. We have agreement there. We have a proposal for refusal based on the recommendations there. Can I have a show of hands for refusal, please? Thank you. Any objections? One objection. Any abstentions? One abstention. Thank you. So that application is refused. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, members. Thank you, members of the public.
Do you want to clarify the voting? Or not?
9. So the voting was 9 for, 1 against and 1 abstention. Thank you. And now we'll move on if we can, please. Can we move on to agenda item 7, which is planning. Members, please. Members, please. If we can move on to agenda item 7, planning appeals update. Ms. Hall, thank you.
Yep. Okay, so there were 4 appeals that we've had to report on, so I'll just run through them. So the first one was a site in Kingston. The application site is outlined in red here. So it was an outline application with all matters reserved except for access for the provision of 12 houses. 7 were proposed to be affordable and 5 were open market. And it was an officer delegated refusal. The appeal was dismissed. The main issues relating to reasons for refusal were impact on the A1B, the appropriateness of the location, effect on biodiversity and drainage. So I've just pulled out a couple of paragraphs which I thought were quite relevant in this appeal. I think the first point, the councillor considered that it was major development, but the inspector felt, given the scale of the proposal in terms of the village and in the context of the village, he didn't consider it was major development in the A1B. So I just wanted to point that out. Other things of interest which I pulled out was in terms of the location was felt to be contrary to the development plan. So there are a number of policies, obviously we've got TTV 27, and there's a number of policies within the neighbourhood plan which support exception sites, affordable led schemes beyond the settlement boundary which they've identified. And I thought it was quite interesting in paragraph 27, whilst there's clearly support for affordable led schemes, on the basis that the inspector had identified that there was harm to the AONB, he didn't feel that the location of this development was acceptable. There was a bit of discussion in terms of the level of affordable housing provision. So TTV 27 within the joint local plan sets out that we will support an element of open market housing to ensure that the scheme is financially viable, and it quotes that it shouldn't represent more than 40%. In terms of what was being proposed, I think it was around the 40% figure, I can't remember offhand. We were arguing that actually there was scope for a higher number of affordable houses. The inspector kind of stayed silent on that point because he was because he was dismissing it for other reasons anyway. I just thought it was quite an interesting thing to pull up. Paragraph 36, linked to one of our refusal reasons, was the lack of up-to-date ecology surveys. Unfortunately, there was a bit of time that had passed from when the application was submitted and to when it was determined. So the ecology surveys, I think there was specific reference by the ecologist that if the site circumstances hadn't changed within a year, then he wanted to see updated surveys. The appellant was arguing because of the length of time that the council had taken to determine the application, that was unreasonable. Inspector concluded that I've got to assess applications based on what's in front of me and in accordance with the development plan, and he wasn't satisfied that it could be covered via condition, and then he wanted to see updated surveys. One of our reasons for refusal was lack of biodiversity net gain. The inspector concluded that because of the sufficient size of the site, it was reasonable to assume they would be able to address this, and felt if all the other matters were acceptable, then it could be conditioned. And similarly with drainage, I think that was one of our refusal reasons, but the inspector felt that actually they provided sufficient information to demonstrate that there was a compliance scheme. And just wanted to pick up on the plan and balance and just reiterating the support for affordable housing. But in this instance, because of the other issues that had been raised, the application was dismissed. Any questions? No. The next application was for a car parking area at the just beyond the kind of built form on Wick Hill in Dartmouth. So there was already an extant consent. Sorry, I'm just jumping around a bit, but there was already an extant consent for a parking area. That parking area was linked to the house, which you can't see here, but there's a bit of a rendered outline of a building behind. That was the dwelling, and the previous application was associated with that house. This application was proposing it not to be linked to the house, and it also included a garage as well. In terms of the main issues, it was kind of the location beyond the within the countryside, impact on the character and appearance of the area, and highway safety, which was the council's reasons for refusal. It was an officer member delegated refusal, and the inspector dismissed the appeal. So in terms of the location, the inspector was satisfied that there was a conflict with policy TTV 26 on the basis that there was that this parking area garage would not be tied to the adjoining property. Without being able to impose a condition, we wouldn't be able to control the use of the garage, and therefore it felt the inspector was satisfied that it conflicted with the aims of TTV 26. Paragraph 8, just thought was useful to pull up in terms of kind of weighing the benefits, but ultimately the inspector felt because of the impact, the fact that it would introduce an unnatural landscape feature, it was ultimately found that it would result in harm. Highway safety, that was quite an interesting comment, I thought, on the basis that we weren't able to condition it to the adjoining house. So in terms of the red line, I've got my little pointer here, but it's tricky to see. So the red line was drawn up to the where this gate is here, but obviously the plans do suggest that you can drive through rather than just being able to drive in, having to turn around and drive out, which is where the council's concerns was coming from, on the basis that, as the plan suggests, you can drive through. The inspector felt that it could be conditioned through condition. It can be controlled through condition. So didn't agree with our view on that. Any questions on that one? The next one was a one in Sundowners in Herbert Road in Salcombe, householder application. So there was an officer delegated refusal, and the inspector allowed this application. So what was proposed was a projecting balcony within the upper floor, which projects off here. And that was off a sitting room area here. So you can see that there would be a projecting balcony. This was the issue with this was all about neighbour amenity. So the site, which is outlined in red here, because of the difference in levels, is at a higher level. The council was concerned about potential overlooking from the balcony into the properties located below, and also into Woodgrange to the side. Because of the differences in levels, the inspector felt that actually it wasn't very easy to see into the properties below. So concluded in terms of these guys that their privacy would be safeguarded. And there was a bit of commentary in terms of Woodgrange. So there's a garage here. The inspector felt actually because of the presence of the garage, the separation distance, and the fact that there was vegetation, that again, that their amenity wouldn't be compromised. Also, quite interestingly, he said actually when most people are using the balcony, they're probably going to be sitting down rather than stood up. So actually, from that perspective, when you're lower down, your views are kind of going to be across neighbouring sites. I just pulled up paragraph 6 because it's something that's often raised in terms of noise and potential disturbance to neighbours. The inspector felt that actually because of its modest size, it wouldn't be able to accommodate many individuals. So actually in terms of that noise issue, he was satisfied that there wouldn't be any unacceptable harm to the neighbours. Any questions? Yes?
It says it's well separated from the internal living space. Often when we go on site visits, neighbours are complaining about how their gardens will be overlooked and it will impinge on their enjoyment of their gardens. Does that suggest there's a much stronger weight given to looking into their internal spaces than there is to their gardens?
Potentially, but obviously he's also gone on to say modestly sized, unable to compare many people, separated. Sorry, what was your question again?
Not specifically on this one, but in general, does it mean that inspectors and planners should give more weight to overlooking into properties rather than into gardens? Because often when we go to site visits, people complain that they'll be able to be seen in their garden.
I think it's a material consideration, and obviously in terms of the relationship, just in elsewhere within the report, he's talked about the separation distance and vegetation. I guess in terms of noise and disturbance, I'd probably think about in terms of how gardens are used. You know, people, yes, they use their gardens, but it's less frequent than when they're inside the property. And lots of it concerns that we often get about noise tend to be late into the evening when people are perhaps probably inside rather than outside. So a material consideration, but obviously each case on its own merits. Any more questions on that one? No. And the last one, which was quite an interesting one. So this was in Higher Batson. Officer delegated refusal and the application was allowed. So, Horsecombe Farm. So this building here, which I think there was previous consent on it for a domestic building, possibly as a garage. You've got the main house here, and I think from memory there's like stables here. There's also another holiday let, or a holiday let, which is in the garden.
They're the stables.
The L shape, is that the?
That's the stable.
That's the stables, and this is the holiday let?
Yes.
Right, thank you for clarifying. So, yeah, there was a proposal to convert it into an annex. Not very well, but you can see that what they wanted was a bed, a bath, and a living area, notably no kitchen. And this was all about the location and having regard to policy Dev 10, which states that annexes will be supported where they're in the same curtilage and ownership as the principal dwelling. They should be clearly ancillary to the principal dwelling via a functional link with no separate demarcation or boundary. So this was a large slope garden, just some comments here that I picked up. Not unusually difficult to negotiate, clear line of sight. Presence of other buildings adds to a sense of close spatial domestic relationship. So two interesting points picked up here. The first being that the dwelling was actually outside of the red line of the application site. It was within the blue line, but outside of the red line. And this was all about, the inspector felt, actually in this instance, it didn't really matter because it was within the same planning unit. And I've just quoted the relevant paragraph here, number 6. Although it's not within the red line of the appeal site, the two share single existing vehicular access track and parking arrangements, and are part of the same planning unit. So yeah, I thought that was quite an interesting thing. And also in terms of facilities, it's something that often comes up, lack of kitchens. The inspector was satisfied that actually they weren't proposing a kitchen. And even if it did include one, because it was sharing existing gardens, access points and parking, all within the wider planning unit, perhaps it wouldn't have mattered. But also, if they were to use it, you felt that it could be conditioned, the use, and if they were to use it as a separate dwelling or as a holiday let or something in the future, then that would be a material change, so they would need a separate permission for that. And in terms of the proposed conditions, I mean, this decision, I believe, predated the climate emergency planning statement. So whether he may take a different view if it was assessed against that. But I think the council had recommended there's proposed solar panels. Yeah, there is solar panels proposed. We were recommending a condition in the event that it was allowed that the solar panels were installed. The inspector concluded that that wasn't necessary because it's an existing building. So the fact that they were using an existing building already complies with the carbon reduction aims of the JLP. But yeah, lots of discussions about annexes following this one.
Thank you. So I think it's useful to see these because we will see, other applications coming through, and it gives us a good sort of opportunity to consider and also look at it from JLP and policy points. So it's useful. Always, tell us if, this sort of discussion, this outline, you don't think is useful, but we, rather than just sort of stating, we felt that picking up these points was useful for members to see. But thank you for that. If no other questions on that, we move on to agenda item 8, which is the update on the undetermined major applications. And in standard form, this is usually just for noting, and if members have concerns about any of these, that to come back to the appropriate planning officer on it. So if there are no other, Councillor Hodgson.
Sorry, I don't want to keep us. We had a very long shopping list of enforcement cases circulated about 10 days ago. Could we raise enforcement at the next meeting? And obviously it would have to be a part 2 at the end of the meeting.
It is something that we've discussed with the Task and Finish group on enforcement about potentially bringing these forward, but obviously enforcement will have to go into a part 2. So that will be coming forward. So yes, you preempted something that will hopefully be coming forward. Thank you. Any other, if there's nothing else, we've concluded the business for today. Thank you for everybody's attendance. Thank you for the officers for your time and input. It is appreciated. I declare the meeting closed. Thank you.
Well done.